Okay, it is exactly 8:30 p.m. Today is Wednesday, July the 10th, 2019, and I am Richard Wright, your instructor for the next now 9 weeks. And welcome to Introduction to Corrections. In my last lecture, I covered in detail the requirements for the course project, and your very first part of that course project is going to be due on this Sunday. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that to make sure that you got that done. I hope that last week after the open house that you started to prepare that assignment, because many times students wait until the last minute to do so. So it is important that you do so. And then I also mentioned that I noticed that not many students listen to the lecture because you're not required to give a keyword, or you don't get any grade for listening to the lecture or attending the lecture. But what you do get is valuable information to help you complete your assignment. So you always want to make sure that you find yourself where you can listen to the lecture and look at it, because there are some things that I cover that you might miss just from the module itself, even though I kind of go over the module a little bit. So let me get started, and I'm going to start by sharing my screen, as I always do. And again, I already provided this information in the last lecture, and so I'm not going to continue over that. I'm going to scroll on down, remind you of the importance of, I figured that. I figured that out there, but thank you. And so anyway, I want to remind you, very important. These lectures are really, 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 really important because, like I said again, this, I think, is the last time, I think, that this course is going to be an 11-week course. After this, I think they're working to get it either by the fall. No, I take that back. I think it'll be by the winter that they go to 5.5. But very important that you pay attention to the lectures. So our next lecture after today will be a week from today, because our lectures will be on Wednesdays from 8:30 to roughly 9:30, and maybe even less than that. So we're going to get started by looking at, hope you had a chance to look at this new student toolkit PDF, and to either attend that lecture, that webinar yesterday. There was a webinar yesterday that took place at 6 o'clock p.m. On APA Basics. The next one is not until August 13th, but you might want to attend that too as well. But then there is coming up a panel discussion Wednesday, July the 17th at 6 o'clock p.m. Central Time, and you can click on this to be able to sign in. And this is helping new students with the live presentations, questions as answers as well, and all students are, you know, even if you're not a new student, you're invited to attend that. So we're doing things to try to help you. So now let's get down to our week 2 announcement. Okay, so this week we're going to talk about sentencing and the correctional process. And I sent you the PowerPoint for Section 4 of the corrections text, and also to complete the activity, sentencing issues and sentencing definitions. And then it tells you about your discussion assignment, the goals and philosophy of sentencing. Your initial post, of course, was due last night, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time, and then your reply post due this Saturday, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. Keep in mind the details as you complete your written assignments concerning the academic integrity announcement that I played the video last week. I won't play it again, but you can always go back and listen to it again if you want. You can copy and paste this to your browser, and then you'll be able to see it. Very important that you listen to it. Or the other way that you can listen to it is to go to your resources tab, which is where I am clicking now, and then here it is here, and then you can see it here as well. So there are multiple ways that you can see that. And then in our resources tab, it also has information about APA and all the different issues, Grammarly, and a writing guide. And then it tells you about webinars that are coming up. If you want to click on that, then you'll see webinars that are coming up as well on APA and other types of things. I already told you about some of the webinars. I told you about the new student panel, and then you can learn about that. And then there's a new student part 2, and then writing and resources and things of that nature. So we have a whole lot of things to help you. Our goal is to help you succeed as a student, and we're here. But as I remind students all the time, we're here, but if you don't reach out to us, it's not going to do any good for you because of the fact that we're here. And you know my policy about reaching out to me, and if you don't, just go back and look at your course homepage right under here, and this box right here, and it tells you. And don't be coy about it. Do it if you need to. So then your written assignments are determinate or indeterminate sentencing. I'll discuss that rubric in just a minute. And then, of course, your first of your 4 course project weeks, which are week 2, 4, 7, and 9. And so we're going to make sure that I cover each of these. As I said before, the next lecture will be week 4, and then during week 6 lecture, I'll cover the written assignment for week 7. So the quarter moves pretty fast. So your agency selection and contact person. It didn't say agency selection. It said contact person as well. Don't tell me the type of agency. I do want to know that, but I want a specific agency. And then that's due this Sunday. And then many of you, or at least a few of you, have responded back to me that you know what I mean by adversity as a springboard to success because you listened to my story. And if you haven't, I do encourage you to go back and listen to it, and you'll hear my statements about my own life that I try to share with students to encourage them, to get them to understand and keep them focused. So that applies to all of my students in every class that I teach. And so here we are with the course calendar. Again, if you click on it, you're familiar with it, it will tell you things that are in here. And then your reply post is due the 13th. And then the 14th, which is Sunday, you're going to submit your written assignments and your reply post. I mean, your initial written assignments and your both your course project and written assignment. Okay, and then Next week, there'll be assignments, and then next week you'll have a written assignment and then a quiz that'll be due the 21st. So the next time that you will see me after today will be the 24th. The 24th, all right? And so you'll see how that is. So that's week 1, week 2, week 4, and this is week 6 right here. All right. So now let's go take a look at the module itself. Okay, and let's look at what the assignments are for the week. Again, you're going to write a 2-page paper. It doesn't say 1, 2-page, double space, people, not single space. Roman 12. And you're going to satisfy the requirements that are listed here. And these are the 2 bullet points. Research the state that you reside and report how your state does sentencing, whether it's determinate or indeterminate sentencing. Include some philosophy on your state's decision. And most states don't have mixtures. Most have one or the other. Many states had one and changed. Illinois, I'm not going to say which one it has because it gives an edge to many of you, but Illinois changed its sentencing from one to the other in 1977. And I know all about it because I was in law school at the time. Research for my senior project, the paper I had to write before I got my law degree in a year later in 78. And I spent that year studying first major change of the Illinois Criminal Code of 1961. And part of that was dealing with determinate or indeterminate sentencing. And you'll see that there's a lot of good information out there in all jurisdictions. But make sure you provide details. Make sure you provide citations in the body. Don't just throw a citation in there. Appropriate citations throughout the paper. Because as I've said before, and I say again, citations are important. Of course, the and academic integrity video supports my position, but it also reminds you that, as I say, oftentimes that the purpose for citations in the body is to provide support for the statements that you include in your papers. So it's very, 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 very important. And so then you have a reference page. And as I remind students, and the academic integrity video again reminds students that there is a requirement that if you have a citation in the body, it should also be reflected on your reference page, and vice versa. If you have a citation and it's not on your reference page, then there's a problem there, and you're going to lose points. Every citation should be listed on the reference page, and every reference should be listed at least once in the body of the paper as a citation. Very, 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 very important. And so this is something we're trying to drum into you for professional reasons, as I've discussed during the open house. So again, we talk about your correct spelling and grammar, and cite APA format, and then we tell you how to find more information about that under Resources tab, which I shared, and also by the fact that I posted an announcement. So now let's tell you what you do. Remember, I said rubrics are so important. So you click on the assignment, and you see first on the left your due date, which is this Sunday the 14th by 11:59 p.m. Central. It's 11:59 p.m. Central, okay? Not 11:59 p.m. your time if you're on, well, if you're on East Coast time, 11:59 p.m. Is going to be earlier. But the point of the matter is, if you're just west of Central, which a few of you are, then you want to make sure that you satisfy that requirement. And then here is the rubric. You can click on it. You get 25 points. That's 100 by doing what I just said. Research the state you reside and report whether your state uses determinate or indeterminate sentencing, and then include details, and then argue which of these two types of sentence you think is more effective, and provide details as to how each component fits into the correction system. And it meets the 2-page requirement there. All right. And then, of course, your standard stuff here about the minimum 2-page requirement, and about citations and references, which I've already discussed. All right. And then you'll see that as you do these papers, you make sure that you have the information that they want you to have again here. Okay. And then you, of course, you know how to submit your assignment in the Dropbox as a Word document, not a PDF. Not many of you have submitted them as PDF, but it's important. I can't grade a PDF document. And then your initial post, which already stated when it was due, and your reply post, you're going to deal with this issue of goals and philosophy of sentencing. Excuse me. And you're going to provide details as asked in the written assignment itself. And remember, I've already told you when the due dates are, but remember, your discussion posts need to be detailed, okay, not just brief remarks. So now let's talk about the course project. Now, as you recall, before I go to that, if you go back to week 1 and you go to the lesson content and you go down all the way to the bottom, past this, right here, it tells you about the course project, and it tells you in detail the things that I covered last week. So I'm not going to go over them. But you'll see that the highlights here. Week 1, there was just an introduction. That's what I did. I went over from A to Z. And so today, you're going to do for week 2, select agency and contact person. And then it tells you when you complete the rest of them. It tells you where you find your questions. It tells you what type of things are expected during the agency overview and background, which, by the way, I do want to say to you, these are not the only things in the agency background when we get to it. I'll talk about that next lecture, though. Okay, and then, you know, that's it. So I just wanted to tell you, because inevitably students are going to ask me, where do I find the questions when they get to week 7? Okay, and people will mix up. And what I've already recommended to students is save your assignments that you complete, each one of those modules, and take the information that I respond back to you and pay attention to it, and then add to it so that you can have it ready for your final paper. So your paper should be nice and sharp. Your final paper, the first part of your paper should be an introduction, and then this information that we're going to be dealing with today. And then the next section will be, and then, you know, usually I say put captions in there. It makes it smoother, all right, and easier to follow. All right, I clicked on section 1. I want to go to section 2. All right. So let's go back to assignments. All right, so anyway, for the course project, this is the shortest part. You get 15 points for it. In a paragraph or 2, remember, double space, describe the agency you have selected. Include a sentence or 2 as to why you picked that agency. Then in another paragraph, identify the person you've interviewed. and provide their contact information. That could be their email, their phone number, anything that we know that we can specifically have to contact them if there's any questions. Um, Sometimes I do call and reach out to those people to determine if an interview has actually taken place. You need to have the opportunity to speak with them. And remember, we talk about how you all use transferable skills in this course. This is an attempt to use your communication skill, and then you're going to be very professional in how you do it. And then you're going to complete it according to the course calendar and according to this. As soon as it opens up, there we go. Your due date, again, and then your rubric. Now, don't anybody say, oh, I haven't found anybody in that. I suggested during week 1 that people get on it. And then here's your rubric. And again, it tells you exactly what I just said a few minutes ago to get 10 points. If you don't have everything in here, you're going to lose some of your points. And then the grammar and so forth. You'll notice that there is no page requirement because there doesn't say pages. This is basic information. And then citations and references, I'm okay with dealing with it, but I don't really, be honest with you, I don't deduct points for this first assignment only. But it's good to have them because then you're providing the source of the information. It's a good habit to build, even when you don't see it and it's needed. Students always ask me, do I have to do this? I said, yes, get into the habit. Develop a habit. It's a good habit to have. All right? And then you submit it. All right? And then that should cover all of the assignments for the week. All right? So now let's go back and let's talk about in the rest of our time here what we're going to deal with in terms of sentencing. What's it all about? Sentencing issues, sentencing definitions. I'm not going to talk about this, and this anymore because I did. I do want to remind you that when you do your papers, always conduct research, not use your textbook alone. Obviously, you can't do it for this written assignment this week because of the fact that your textbooks don't contain whether your state has determined indeterminate sentencing, but in future assignments, keep that in mind as well. So let's talk about sentencing issue. So when does sentencing come into effect? Well, first of all, you have to remember, again, and I harp over and over, that this is a course on corrections. And you don't correct something unless there's something wrong with it. And what brings a person into corrections is that they have either pled guilty or been found guilty by a judge or a jury of committing a criminal offense. Once that happens, they are in the system for corrections, and corrections takes them to one of the 4 requirements, one of the 4 sections. Either go to jail, they'll either go to prison, or they go to jail and then prison, or they will end up with probation or parole. Remember, you can't have parole unless you at least go to jail. All right? If you get probation, then you probably won't receive parole because you don't get paroled from jail. You get paroled from prison. And then the other part is probation generally means that you might have been in jail for a short period of time, and then you're released to do the rest of your sentence outside of that. The same with parole, except it's from prison as opposed to jail. So if you get that in your head straight, then you got it. And so now we're today going to talk about sentencing issues. What is the purpose of sentencing? And sentencing carries so many variations and the goals and purpose, such as to incapacitate, obviously, to take you out of the situation. And the goals discussed are deterrence generally, retribution, and one other one. There are some others, but you will find quickly what my favorite is, and that's rehabilitation. I constantly refer to rehabilitation in courses because of my extensive years of dealing with the criminal justice system in the various capacities as a defense lawyer, as a local prosecutor, as a police officer, investigator, as a paralegal in my career. And so I remind students of the reason why I am so adamant on rehabilitation, and I'll discuss that. But our system originally dealt with the idea of deterring someone. When you deter someone, what you're doing is you're planting the idea in them that if they do something wrong, that they're going to receive a penalty for it. And so what happens is it's supposed to work where the way you do your kids. If you give your kids some kind of punishment, they will think about committing that offense or another offense in future times. However, when it comes to really dealing with deterrence, deterrence doesn't really work. Deterrence works for that period of time that the individual may be incarcerated, removed, or under the guise of the system. But as soon as that's removed, they go back to the same thing. That's why it says here in reality, we know that many criminals are never caught and punished. So deterrence, it says, is less effective. But let's talk about those that are caught and punished. So immediately what happens after that is you're under the guise of the correction system. And incapacitation, which is, as I say, locking you up, and that stops you. Well, yeah, it does, because from committing crimes outside, you may commit crimes inside the facility, but the fact of the matter is that you're kept away from the general public. And so the idea of incapacitation is to stop you from committing the crime, and to also give you, under deterrence theory, to think about it before you do it again, because you're going to have to do it. And that there is the philosophy, which we go on a little further, that if you keep repeating yourself and doing it, you get more time. If the crime is more severe, then you get more time, such as if it's a misdemeanor, which is a sentence of less than a year in a facility, then you will find yourself in jail, and that's a less serious offense, like battery or something like that, petty theft or something like that. But then you get to the felony side, and then you get more time because it's a more serious offense, such as robbery, and then the ultimate murder, rape, kidnapping, and those kind of things. So anyway, the point is well taken here in this little short blurb, that what I'm telling you, it says clearly it does assist for the time period that the person is incarcerated. However, research shows that incapacitation does not reduce recidivism. And the word recidivism is a definition, which means repeat offender. It means that you continue to do it. I can tell you that during my years as a lawyer, criminal defense lawyer, and I started practicing in 1978, and by the time I retired in 2000, that I had represented not only individuals committing crimes over and over, but I also represented some of their children, some of the younger ones that were coming up, and so it becomes a culture. But the recidivism aspect, people find is a way of life, and that's how the people operate in terms of their lives until it's ended either by them being killed or them reaching the point of killing someone. And so we get to the point that my favorite area of oh, by the way, while I'm talking about deterring, and there is a question that I often ask students, and I'll ask this question, and then you can type if you think so. Do you think that the death penalty adds to deter individuals from committing crimes? Do you think that the death penalty does that? Yes or no? You can type that in the chat box and I'll see it. That's right. The answer is no. And the reason why it's no is because crime still goes on and the death penalty goes on. Now, many jurisdictions don't have the death penalty, not because of the fact that it doesn't work, but because of the fact that Illinois and my alma mater, Northwest University School of Law, has a wrongful conviction section, and it was discovered that there were too many people who were placed on death row who were charged with crimes, and subsequent to that, it was discovered through one of the greatest assets to the criminal justice system and investigation other than cameras is DNA. And it was determined that many of those people did not commit those offenses. And so the deal is that if you have just one innocent person executed, that's one too many. And then the other issue is this, is that it wasn't just one. It just kept going on and on. And there were innocent people convicted also because of forced confessions, which we had some of that we dealt with here during what we call the Burge, B-U-R-G-E era here in Chicago, where we had a superintendent chief of, he wasn't a chief, he was a police commander who at a district that I was familiar with because I had clients there in Chicago on the south side that was forcing confessions out of individuals using things like cattle prods, and they would actually beat individuals into providing false confessions and things like that. So those persons would end up on death row and they hadn't done anything. So anyway, so the answer is yes, correctly, that the death penalty is not a deterrent factor to crime. The only one it deters is the individual who actually ultimately ends up being executed. And there have cases, which is one too many, of individuals who they later discover, oops, we got the wrong person. Can't change that. The person's dead. You can pay all the money you want to people. And then the other part is that then there's a lot of individuals who are wrongfully convicted and they're incarcerated for extended years. You probably hear about these all the time now, that they find out that they didn't do it. And they serve 25, 30 years while they're not either on death row, but because of the sentences that they received, that they are unjustifiably kept in prison. But what happens is they become criminals. So anyway, that's a whole nother discussion. I always get excited about teaching this class because of the fact that it gets into the mentality of what's going on in our criminal justice system. So anyway, this brings me to my favorite concept that you'll hear me over and over say, rehabilitation, the idea that we can redirect an individual's attitude, behavior to reduce their crime. And so in rehabilitation, there's a number of things that are involved. First of all, we provide, from the educational perspective, the ability to get degrees in education. You'll hear me talk about this more than once. I participated as a lawyer in a program called Probation Challenge, and it is now on the books in Illinois. That started in my mentor, R. Eugene Pincham's the late R. Eugene Pencham, who became a justice, but I first met him when I was in law school, and he helped me a lot, and who was the one that I mentioned that directed me to become a criminal defense lawyer, even with all the tragedy that I went through in my childhood. But it demonstrated to me that you will find individuals that are going to be less incarcerated if they're more educated. And also, I tell people that statistically, and Mr. Pencham provided the details to us, that it was cheaper to educate than to incarcerate. And so it has been demonstrated that these individuals who went through these programs, like Probation Challenge, and what Probation Challenge did was that if you came before Judge Pencham's courtroom, room 702 in the Cook County Criminal Courts building at 26 in California and Chicago, that if you committed an offense that was, first of all, a nonviolent offense, and that you qualified for probation, that he would see if you had a high school diploma. And most of the time you will find that they didn't have high school diplomas. And so what he would then is give an opportunity to the student to go to school, and they had a program that you go through and obtain your GED, and you know, it's general education diploma. And so it was discovered that those individuals who went through that they would dismiss the charges. They would wipe them off the books. They didn't have to do anything themselves. The system took care of it. And many of those students actually went on not just to get their GEDs, but we were affiliated with a junior college in Chicago called Olive Harvey, which was one of the branches of the Chicago City Colleges, and that they could go on and get an associate's degree, like many of you are. And they could go on and they can work in a way where they don't have to commit crime. So that helps rehabilitate. And some even went on to college. And one we even know actually went on and did, and I don't know if he still is practicing, but he became a lawyer. At any rate, rehabilitation changes a person, education, because it gives them information that they can make a living on after they've graduated, as you are doing yourself. The other thing is that in order to deal with rehabilitation, you can educate all day long. If a person has a drug or an alcohol problem, you need programs to provide opportunities for those individuals to receive help. I've already said, and I teach drugs and crime, J115 in this school, that individuals who commit crimes oftentimes commit them to support their drug habits, and they don't intend on becoming criminals, but you know, the drugs have control of them. And so in order to rehabilitate those individuals, it is important that you address the health issue, which I refer to as alcoholism or either drug addiction, and to be able to have those taken care of. And then the other issue that relates to and fits within the rehabilitation is to get those individuals to the point where they provide some help with housing, which probation parole does, but it steps up even better. And then the ultimate thing is there are many what we call second chance programs, where individuals are hired by companies even though they know they have a record, and those kind of things. And then individuals can go forward and sometimes reach the point where they work their way out of that way of life. So crime becomes a way of life. And so with rehabilitation, so somebody said, well, should you be punishing individuals? Well, here's my spin on it. I'm 69 years old. I would rather see a person who's incarcerated come out with a new lease on life or an opportunity to move forward, and not find themselves back, because as I said before, the revolving door thing happened a whole lot during my career and extended to next level of family members. But as I find myself in the situation, I always want to remind people that it is so important that you find yourself with the ability to be able to have people around you who are less violent, who are less involved in crime. And that's because, like I said, as I get older, and after all, you and I both know that when people are incarcerated or in the correction system, they're going to be in there not for their lives, not in most cases. Some there are. Of course, you commit the offenses that require life, that pretty much many jurisdictions that don't give the death penalty will give a life sentence to an individual, and life means life. But the point of the matter is that those individuals are going to be released and around you, and so you want them to have a new approach in life. You don't want them coming with the same old stuff, because they could hurt you or your loved ones. So the point of the matter is that the numbers go down. Now, there is some argument, and Judge Pensham did research. He was very knowledgeable, to say that the system itself does not always want education, because with education, what will happen is that individuals will find themselves fewer and fewer going to jail or being in the system, and individuals who actually make their living, like police officers, such as correction officers, and the list goes on, probation, parole, and all of them, might have to find some other things to do. Well, quite honestly, that would be a good thing for society as a whole. And then I will continue to teach criminal justice from the perspective of rehabilitation, because the fact that I say again, I say it's cheaper to educate than incarcerate. I say it's cheaper to rehabilitate than to incarcerate as well, and it's overall better for society. And it has happened. I've seen individuals that were really bad people turn their lives around. And so there are a lot of options that are available for sentencing today. And sentences are imposed. You found guilty, plead guilty. The judge orders what we call a PSI, pre-sentence investigation. And that investigation is conducted by the probation department, and it determines what your background is, whether you've been in trouble before, and your tendency towards committing crimes is as your first offense. And then, of course, then the sentence is imposed by the judges. And so there has been an argument about whether the judges should have more control over the sentences of individual. And so thus the debate comes about for your assignment for this week, whether or not there should be indeterminate or determinate sentencing today. And so the determinate sentencing can limit the judge's discretion and what they can do. Now, keep in mind this, is that a person can be sentenced for not sentenced for something, but can be charged with something, but the prosecutor can also reduce those charges, because the prosecutor is key in determining what the charges are, because no one can make the prosecutor bring forth certain charges. So there are cases where individuals are charged with murder and then end up with second-degree murder instead. And then there are people who are charged with murder and then aggravated battery, and then aggravated battery involves committing a crime with a weapon or some other item used. But anyway, the debate continues over which one is better, and you're going to have a chance to provide information concerning your research about that. So the judge's discretion is limited by the mandatory minimum sentence, which comes through dealing with determinate sentencing. And indeterminate sentencing, they might have more flexibility in terms of what they can do in terms of sentencing individuals. So the final statement here in this section is that you should understand that the sentencing options is what takes place in the correction system to enforce the orders of the community, such as dealing with probation, where I already said in probation you don't go to jail, you get a chance to finish your time back in the community. But then the rehabilitation processes should take place in there as well. And then parole, of course, is when you've been incarcerated in not jail but in prison, and then you're released. Now, some jurisdictions don't use the term parole. Illinois uses mandatory supervised release. The idea of parole and what is intended to do is to give a person a chance to, as they say, ease back into the community. Because I always say that when you incarcerate someone in prison or jail, the longer they're there, the more they have a chance, even if they're innocent, of becoming a criminal, as been demonstrated by individuals who are later determined that they didn't commit the crime, but in order to survive in the facility, they adapted to that and picked up some habits that carry on to their lives once they are released. So, so that's what I want to say about sentencing itself. All right. So now let's talk about, in the time that we have left here, just kind of look at some sentencing concepts and terms that, okay, there we go. We talk about terminology and learning terminology so that you build upon this as you go through this process. By the way, some of your tests that come up will be added on information that you learned in Chapter 2. A student asked me about that. I said, yeah. I says, unfortunately, some of the quizzes have one question, not two, but maybe one, that generally spill over into, but in the first chapter, I do want to say to that one student, if that student listens to the recording, that that student will discover that there was some quick reference or mention about the idea that comes about with some of those questions that were involved in week 1. Remember, you don't have a quiz this week, but you will have one, I believe, in week 4. I think that's the next one. You might have one in week 3, but anyway, looking at the schedule. So anyway, what is general deterrence? Well, this will help you if you flip it over. How punishment is used to prevent others from committing crimes. The idea that severely punishing the convicted will deter others who are contemplating criminal acts. We already had the discussion. It's a philosophy, but in actual practice, it doesn't really apply. Now, let's talk about specific deterrence. What's the difference? You'll see in a minute. The individual focuses on the individual, that they should learn that crime doesn't pay, and the harsh penalty experience. I don't care whether it's general or specific. The point of the matter is it doesn't work in actual practice, and I already discussed why. Incapacitation. That means very simply this: taking you out, physically restraining or isolating you to protect society. In other words, putting you behind bars, to put it bluntly. And so does that work? Do people go behind bars and come out and commit crime? Yes. and the numbers prove it. And I already told you one of the reasons why individuals do so is because the longer that they're incarcerated, the more likely they're to pick up habits that will result in them becoming, even though they were wrongfully convicted, they will pick up and become criminals then from that particular point. So it does stop them while they're behind bars, but eventually, as I said, they're going to be released. Selective incapacitation. That is, the repeat offenders are sentenced to longer sentences. Well, the point of the matter is that that's the whole point. A nutshell is that if you keep doing a crime, then the more you do it, the judge has the capacity, ability to be able to send you away for more time. But I said it's a double-edged sword. We can't just let you go, so we do. That's why I bound back on from the beginning. I like to respond when it's smoke rather than when it's a fire. In other words, when a person gets in trouble, and that's why I was a lawyer for many young people in the juvenile system, and the purpose of the juvenile system, as you'll learn in future weeks to come in this course, that I think it's week 10. Let's see, I think it's week 10, yeah, about the juvenile offender. You'll discover that that's where we really need to fix it. I was teaching special education back in 2000, and many of those kids were heading towards future adult criminal actions and activities and things, but we try to head it off at the pass. So the bottom line is repeat offenders are sentenced for longer periods of time, but it still costs money to incarcerate those individuals. Rehabilitation, we already talked about that a lot. Changing the attitude, direction, character, to get them to stop and think about before they commit a crime, and also give them something in its place. Don't just make them think about it, but give them something like I said, education or help with the drugs or crime. Listen to me. You can take a person who has a drug and an alcohol problem, lock them up, and then they get out, they go back to doing it. Somebody says, didn't they learn anything from being incarcerated? Probably. They learned how to get more drugs and alcohol. Or, put it this way, let me ask this question, and not for you to answer, it's rhetorical, is that if you have a illness and you don't take care of that illness will still stay there and or possibly become more severe if you don't treat it. And so you want to find yourself in a situation where you do everything you possibly can to try to address the issues. Well, it's the same thing here, is that individuals go in and they keep going around and around and around. Eventually, they're going to kill themselves or kill somebody else, as I've had clients that were guilty of that. So rehabilitation is humane, I think, for both the individual as well as for society, and benefits society the most. Just desserts. It says exactly what it means. It means you get what's coming to you, commensurate with the seriousness of the offense. So that means the more serious the offense, the more the sentence should be, the longer the sentence is. And that's what that is. That's what that term means. So when you run across it. Restorative justice. You're going to be doing some research on that coming up, I believe, next week. I think I'm right. I don't know if it says it here or not. Yeah, I think you will be. One of the assignments next week have to do with restorative justice. But restorative justice is basically what it means. It's preparing the harm, repairing the harm, and the individual makes amends. Either, they'll pay some money, or they'll understand that the system will keep taking them in, but then when they come out, they will begin to move in a new direction. Be aware that rehabilitation is not something like anything else that works overnight. It takes time and patience to do it. But as I try to tell people all the time, that you don't have leaps and bounds in terms of resolving issues. Oftentimes, you take time, and then it becomes a way of life. Changing the way of life. The equity goal of punishment, very simply stated, means that you got to pay back victims, restitution or something, or with the time. And so you pay the system like court costs, or you might pay some other costs for the processing of the case and for the disruption of those individuals. So it gets to the form of dealing with providing something back to the victims themselves, restoring them or attempting to restore them. Concurrent sentences. Concurrent means what it says. It means that a person is convicted at 2 or more crimes, that the sentences begin on the same day, are completed when the longest has been served. I remember a case with my adopted mother when she was the victim of a kidnapping, and she was actually shot, and the person who was with her actually died. And so the person, it was reported in the media that the person got, I think it was 120 years, which was 4 terms of, either 4 terms of 30 years or 3 terms of 40 years. Either way, it adds up to 120. But here's the problem, is that the sentences were served concurrently, which meant each day you served a part of the other. So basically what you did was you took the sentence of 120 years and turned it into a 40-year as opposed to 120 years, or rather a 40-year if it was 3 40s, or if it was 4 30s, then you turned into 30 years. And then back in those days, too, you had good behavior, which meant 15. And I kind of explained that a little bit with the story of what happened in my life when the person was sentenced to 10 years, which turned out to be 3.5 years after the sentence was actually completed. But anyway, so concurrent sentences are running together, all right? The next one is consecutive sentences, and it means that you finish one and then the other starts. For example, we had a police officer here in Bolingbrook. His name was Drew Peterson, was convicted of killing one of his wives, and he was sentenced to so many years. I can't remember what it was 60 or whatever it was. But anyway, while he was incarcerated, he was then also further convicted of taking out a contract on the prosecutor who prosecuted him in the original case, and he was found guilty of that and sentenced to, is it 30, maybe 30 or 40 more years, which is going to be consecutive. So he has to finish the sentence for the first one and then start the other, which basically turns into a life sentence. So consecutive sentences are longer than concurrent for obvious reasons. But they make a big difference in how much time that the person actually serves. Determinate sentencing, okay, we're going to be dealing with that. A fixed term of years, the maximum established by the legislature. And so I'm not going to say more about it. I was getting ready to say something, but that would help the Illinois people, but I'm not going to do that because I want you to do your research. So the fact of the matter is that the judge can only give you a maximum of whatever that range is, and the minimum. Cannot go above, cannot go below. put it like that. And then there's some other built-in protections, all right? So that's determinate. On the other hand, indeterminate sentencing is early release from the institution after they serve a required portion of the sentence. It's kind of like what I talked about that happened to me as a child when it came to the guy being sentenced to 10 years and serving 5 originally, and then ultimately a year and a half off for good behavior while incarcerated as well. So what that amounts to is that there can be early release from the institution after the person served a required minimum portion. In other words, what would happen is that that person would come up and be eligible for parole depending on how they operated while they were incarcerated at the time. Sentencing guidelines are very simply the more severe the crime, the more the time, and their background. Remember, I already told you that there is a pre-sentence investigation that is prepared as well. All right. Now, presumptive sentencing guidelines are where the legislature sets the penalties, and whatever the penalty that the legislature says, the judge can't go around that, and is mandated by the statute. Mandatory minimum sentences specifies a certain number of years for specific crimes, and you'll see that quite frequently in most jurisdictions. So if you commit certain crime, this is about how much time you'll end up getting. 3 strikes law. We call this the Habitual Offenders Act, which is something that is a part of what you'll discover, at least in my state, that came about starting in 1977 when I told you we did the research and changed the 1961 Illinois Criminal Code with this first major change, which took us from one form of sentencing to another form of sentencing. It says repeat offenders receive long sentences with no parole for conviction if a third or more felony. Now, what has happened is that these have been modified to deal with violent offenses, and we used to call it the 3 strikes law. But that's what they started using. But it was Habitual Offenders Act, actually, that we called it in Illinois, and most jurisdictions have variations of that. Truth in sentencing. Let me say this to you people, that truth in sentencing requires offenders to serve a big portion of their sentence before they are actually released. And so the key is, did you not know that years and years and years ago, that when a person was sentenced to life, that meant a year and a day in some senses? That's the way it was. But now life, means natural life. Or as one judge described to a young man that I represented, that if he is found guilty of a particular offense because they couldn't give him the death penalty, that he would receive natural life, which the judge described as leaving the facility with a tag on his toe, and you know what that means there. So the key is that substantial portions of the sentence is going to be served by individuals, and so that you can't actually cut it down, but you have an idea about what that might be. And the key thing is, when it says truth in sentencing, is to get you as close to, if 10 meant 10, you get as close to 10 as possible, not with 5 good behavior, which means for each day you serve 2 days. So that meant that 10 meant 5, as it did in the instance back in 1964. And so truth in sentencing is something that has existed for a long, long time on the federal level, but many states now are moving in that same direction, and rightfully so. Okay, and that's the end of the exercise that we have here. Um, so you can always go back and you can study that again. Now, before I adjourn, it's about 5 after, but I'm going to quickly just share this with you since there is no lecture next week. The assignments for week 3. Clicking over. Here we go. See, remember I was talking about restorative justice. So you're going to have a written assignment about restorative justice that I kind of just shared with you. And you're going to, of course, check the rubric. That's going to match. It's a 1 to 2 page paper. I always want to caution students, whenever you have a 1-page paper, it is very important for you to make sure that you have a good portion of critical thinking involved in your papers. I've discussed that. If you haven't looked at the videos, you need to look at them. I'm going to post an announcement today reminding students to please take the time to look at the videos. You don't receive points for it, but what it does is that it enhances your ability to be able to complete the assignments and may answer some questions that you might presume when you start the assignment. But anyway, restorative justice. So then, of course, your discussion post dealing with intermediate sanctions. And then, so there is a quiz next week. All right, so you want to go over the material and you know how the quizzes work. I thought it was not until week 4, but you do have one in week 3. You only have 5 in this course out of the 11 weeks. All right, and then the last thing is dealing with the objectives and so forth. You want to take a look at, and there's some readings involving restorative justice. There's some issues dealing with probation facts and diversion, and you want to look at this video, a conversation with a CCA director. But you can work these little exercises by going over them, and you can learn things. These help you to prepare for the exam, by the way. Deal with diversion, and then you'll listen to this individual who community corrections person can provide details about how probation operates and things like that. And it's only a 4-minute video. And so that's it for that next week. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing that. And okay, using a work computer at work, and that is why I'm typing and not talking. That's okay. No, I don't want you to talk anyway. Typing is fine anyway. I want to make sure that you use the chat box. So, all right. So I got it. So, any questions on anything? If so, type yes or no. And if you don't type anything, I'll think the answer is no. All right. Well, I thank you guys for taking the time. Again, it's important that you pay attention to, okay, if you can't think of any now, that's okay. You know the rule about how you can reach out to me. And I respond pretty quickly, as some students have already discovered how quickly I respond back. Okay, no problem. And actually, that's, you know what I'm talking about there, the person who said thank you. So the point matter is that I want to make sure that I help you guys and you do well. So I'm going to say good night to you. See you in a couple of weeks. I got some grading to do. Try to get your papers completed by the end of this week. So I'm going to say good night to you. And if you missed any part of the video, go back and listen to it. Good night. Have a good week.